Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another exciting TJ Reviews. Today I'll be reviewing the recently released English version of Blade & Soul, the free-to-play MMO from NCSoft. Originally coming out in 2012 in Korea, the game has slowly been expanding to China in 2013, Japan and Taiwan in 2014, and finally to North America and Europe on January 19th, 2016. The game itself has been making headlines with its popularity, but I'm going to figure out if I think it really deserves it and answer that age-old question, will I recommend it? The first thing you get to do in Blade & Soul, like any other MMO, is to create your character. The character creator is actually really good. It has some presets if you're like me and don't really get into spending hours making sure that jawline is perfect, but the amount of customizability is impressive. There are sliders for almost every aspect of your features, so you can really make the character look the way you want. The races don't offer too much beyond a background and some visual differences, and each race is limited to 3 classes they can play as. This was the first issue I had with the game. I really liked the description of the Blade Dancer class, but it can only be played by the Lin, who are basically tiny humanoids with bushy tails and ears. They kind of look like animal chibis, which doesn't really appeal to me. I know this probably won't bother too many people, but to me it was a deal breaker. I chose to play the assassin instead. From a visual standpoint, the game is beautiful, especially when you realize it came out in 2012. It captures the Asian folklore feel to a T. The only real issue that I have is the fog that is always visible. There are some sections where having a fog-filled area adds to the gloom and mystery, but it's in every area, even the brightly lit opening areas. I'm not sure if this was done as an aesthetic choice or it's done to hide their draw distance, but it felt out of place more often than not. The world itself is cut into smaller areas with gates separating each area, so it's not the giant open world that you would see in World of Warcraft, but the areas are still relatively big. However, when transferring between areas, I noticed massive frame rate drops and popping issues. They would clear up after a minute or two, but with how small some of the connecting areas were, I could sometimes get through the entire area before my frame rate would return to a normal pace. For a 4-year-old game running on a close to top-of-the-line system, that's not acceptable. The combat is definitely the strongest feature of the game. You start out with a few abilities and slowly learn more as you level up. When you engage an opponent, you can string together different abilities to form combos. There are even some abilities at higher levels that require you to string other abilities before you can activate them. This gives the combat a very exciting action feel that makes each victory very satisfying. There are 2 control schemes, the traditional keyboard and mouse and gamepad support. I played almost exclusively with the gamepad, which made the combat feel even more like an action game rather than an MMO, which I thoroughly enjoyed. The default keybinds were awkward to me, but you can rebind almost every ability so you can get it to play almost exactly the way you want. I also like the fact that once you turn on the gamepad controls, the game gives you directions and hints that display the gamepad buttons, not the keys on the keyboard, and they change when you rebind them, so you never have to guess what button to push. The only real downside to the combat is that as you get to higher levels, depending on your class, the combat gets confusing quickly with its complexity. They do have a great training system where you actually get quests that teach you how to use the basic abilities of your class, but I found myself out-leveling them quickly to the point where I had to teach myself how to use a lot of the abilities through trial and error. Even with that, it was still a lot of fun. The story itself is relatively generic. If you've played an Asian mythology-based game before, you've seen it before. You belong to a secret elite martial arts school, you're singled out for being special, but before your master can tell you why, an evil rival martial artist comes in and slays your master. Your mission is to avenge his death, rinse, repeat. The cutscenes that tell the story are really pretty, but I found I didn't really care about the story after the first 6 to 8 levels. I cared more about leveling my character and watching them grow. As you gain levels, you automatically learn new abilities until you reach level 15. Then the training system unlocks after you finish part of the main story. The training system lets you customize your abilities by spending points, similar to skill trees in other MMOs. The system focuses on changing how the abilities work to better fit your personal playstyle rather than just pure power modifications, giving you the ability to make your character play exactly the way you want them to, to a point. The game itself is fun to play when you can actually play it. Which brings me to the biggest issue I have with it. The game is rife with technical issues. For the first few days after launch, you couldn't actually play the game unless you were a subscriber to their premium service. This wasn't done intentionally, but the queues for non-premium members would number over 4,000, and you would have to wait hours just to get on the servers. It's obvious they weren't expecting the game to be as popular as it turned out to be, and didn't add enough servers to handle the entire customer base. They soon added more, which had even more problems. Even with the game being out for a week now, there has yet to be a day where they haven't had a server go down, or connection issues, or had to perform a full restart on some and or all of the servers. If you watch their Twitter, it's just a long list of "we're aware of this issue and are trying to fix it" over and over again. It actually limited my ability to play to the point that I was only able to get around 10-ish hours into the game before I wrote this review. My highest level character only just hit 15, and I still haven't been able to do any of the dungeons in the game. The other problem I have is with the monetization of the game. As I said before, they do have a premium service that adds a ton of features. You earn increased XP and gold from a number of sources, along with faster chi recovery and a bunch of other things. You also get put in the premium players queue, meaning whenever the servers are overloaded, like they have been since launch, premium members get to play first. This isn't really a new thing. A lot of free-to-play MMOs do it. It's just the fact that for at least a few days, it was basically a requirement to play at all that I take issue with. There's also a lot of things in the game that almost require spending real-world money. In order to get certain items that let you upgrade your main weapon, which is how your attack power increases, you have to get the right item from a random reward box. You don't have to spend money to get the right items, but the drop rate is so low and random that it can take literally hours of farming just to get the one item that lets you break through to the next upgrade bunch. And since it's really the only way to get better weapons, it puts a lot of pressure on the player to spend their money or be stuck in a perpetual grind forever. So, with all of this, what do I think of the game? I kinda recommend it. When you can play, it's a really fun game. The story is a bit bland and the combat can be confusing, but even with all that, I still had a ton of fun playing it. However, right now, you can't always play it. And if I was spending real-world money to play, I would be very upset. So if you don't mind a little uncertainty about whether it will be playable at any given time, give it a shot. If, however, you get angry when unannounced downtimes happen and emergency patches go out, you may want to wait until this has been out a little bit longer before you dive in. Well, that's all for me today, and I will see you in the next game. Bye-bye!